Most girls dreamed of a diamond ring, white lace, and a man on one knee. Lana dreamed of making rent. When she was staring down a stack of final notice medical bills, romance was a delusion she couldn't afford. So, when the heir to the city's most violent syndicate offered to buy her life for 12 months, she didn't see a monster. She saw a lifeline. It was supposed to be a business deal, clean, cold, temporary. Until the night his mouth crashed onto hers, and the lie became the most dangerous truth of all. The fluorescent lights in the St. Jude Urgent Care Clinic didn't just illuminate you, they interrogated you. They cast a sickly yellow hue over the peeling linoleum, highlighting every speck of dirt the janitor missed. At 3 a.m, the waiting room was usually a sanctuary for the city's ghosts, drunks sleeping off a bender, insomniacs staring at the mute television, and Lana. Lana was 26, running on 4 hours of sleep and mainlining coffee that tasted like battery acid. She was wiping down the intake counter with a bleach rag when the automatic doors hissed open. The cold October wind blew in, carrying the scent of rain, exhaust, and copper. 2 men walked in. Actually, 1 man walked, the other was practically carrying him. "We need a room," the standing one said. He wore a leather jacket that cost more than her car, and his eyes were darting toward the street. Now, Lana didn't hit the panic button under the desk. Panic buttons meant police. Police meant questions, and questions meant paperwork she didn't want to do. She looked at the man being supported. He was tall, broad shoulders beneath a ruined charcoal suit. His head was down, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his left hand was pressed tight against his ribs. Blood, thick, dark, and undeniable, was seeping through his fingers, dripping onto her freshly bleached floor. "Name and insurance card," she said, her voice deadpan. The standing man scoffed, reaching into his jacket. Not for a wallet, Lana recognized the shape of the bulge near his armpit. Before he could draw, the bleeding man raised a hand. He lifted his head. His eyes were grey. Not a soft, cloudy grey, but the color of wet concrete. He looked at her, and the air in the room suddenly felt very thin. His face was pale, his jaw clenched so hard, a muscle feathered beneath his skin. But there was no fear in him, just a cold, calculating annoyance. "No names," he rasped, his voice rough, like a shovel scraping stone. "No insurance. 10,000 in cash. Right now. You stitch this up, and we were never here." $10,000. Her mother's assisted living facility was threatening to discharge her by Friday. The outstanding balance was $8,642. Lana stared at the blood pooling on the linoleum. She looked at his eyes. "Room 3, she said, tossing the bleach rag into the trash. "Keep pressure on it." She locked the front doors, flipped the open sign to closed, and followed them back. He sat on the examination table, refusing to lie down. His companion paced the small room like a caged dog. Lana snapped on a pair of latex gloves, grabbed a pair of trauma shears, and stepped up to him. "Move your hand," she ordered. He didn't hesitate. He pulled his hand away, and the smell of raw iron hit the air. She cut away the ruined fabric of his shirt. It was a clean through-and-through puncture. A bullet. Small caliber, but it had torn through the meat of his side, grazing the ribs. "You're lucky," she muttered, grabbing the iodine. "An inch to the left, and your lung would be filling with blood right now. This is going to burn." She poured the iodine directly over the wound. He didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. His jaw locked tighter, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. But his grey eyes stayed locked on her face. He was watching her work. watching her hands. "You don't shake," he noted. "It's just meat," she replied, threading a curved needle with local anesthetic. "I've seen worse. Hold still." For the next 20 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the hum of the fluorescent tubes and the wet, tearing sound of the sutures pulling through his skin. Lana worked with mechanical efficiency. She didn't ask who shot him. She didn't ask who he was. She just tied the knots, snipped the thread, and wrapped his torso in thick white gauze. "Done," she said, peeling off her gloves and throwing them in the biohazard bin. "Keep it clean. Don't lift anything heavier than a coffee mug for 2 weeks. If it gets warm to the touch or starts oozing yellow, you have an infection. At that point, you go to a real hospital, or you die. Your choice." His companion tossed a thick manila envelope onto the metal counter. The bleeding man buttoned his ruined shirt over the bandages. He stood up. He was a full head taller than Lana, and up close, the scent of expensive cologne fought through the smell of blood. "You didn't ask any questions," he said softly. "I don't care enough to ask," she answered, meeting his stare. "Take your envelope and get out. I have to mop the floor before my shift ends." A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the look of a man who had just found something interesting in the dirt. "Have a good night, nurse," he said. They walked out into the rain. Lana locked the door behind them, opened the envelope, and counted the stacks of $100 bills. 10,000 exactly. She didn't feel relief. She felt a heavy, sinking stone in her gut. You don't take dirty money without some of the dirt rubbing off on you. It took him exactly 6 days to find her. Lana was sitting in a booth at a diner 3 blocks from her apartment. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The rain hadn't stopped all week, turning the city into a grey, blurred watercolor. She was eating cold fries and staring at a spreadsheet on her laptop, trying to figure out how far the remaining $1,400 would stretch. The bell above the diner door jingled. The ambient chatter in the room slowly died down, replaced by the clatter of silverware and nervous silence. She didn't need to look up. She felt him before she saw him. He slid into the vinyl booth across from her. No blood this time. He wore a tailored navy suit that fit perfectly over his broad shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that probably cost a month of her salary. His hair was styled, his face shaved. The bruising around his jaw had faded to a dull yellow. "Victor," the waitress whispered, her hand shaking as she offered a menu. "Just black coffee, Rita." "Thank you," he said. His voice was smooth now, lacking the gravel of pain. Victor. Lana didn't know his last name, but she didn't need to. In this city, if people stopped talking when a man named Victor walked into a room, you knew exactly who he was. Victor Rossi. The Rossi family owned the docks, the unions, and half the politicians in the state. "You stalk all the women who stitch you up in the middle of the night?" she asked, closing her laptop. He leaned back, resting his arms on the table. The cuff of his shirt pulled back just enough to reveal a heavy gold watch. "Only the ones who don't blink when they see a bullet wound." Lana Hayes, 26, unmarried, no kids. You dropped out of med school in your 3rd year to take care of your mother when the dementia set in. You work 2 jobs, sleep an average of 4 hours a night, and you have 0 criminal record. Her stomach tightened, but she kept her face blank. "Congratulations, you know how to use Google." "I know how to use people," he corrected gently. Rita dropped the coffee on the table and scurried away. Victor took a slow sip, his grey eyes pinning Lana to the vinyl seat. "I have a problem, Lana, and I think you are the solution. I'm not a hitman. I have plenty of those," he said dryly. "I need something much rarer. I need a fiancé." She stared at him. The rain lashed against the diner window. A siren wailed in the distance. She waited for the punchline, but his face was carved from marble. "Are you insane?" she finally asked. "Pragmatic," Victor replied. "My father died 3 months ago. The transition of power has not been smooth. The old men on the commission, the men who control the legitimate businesses, the offshore accounts, the real estate, they think I'm too volatile, too young, too reckless. They won't hand over the keys to the kingdom until they feel I'm anchored." "And a wife anchors you. A specific kind of wife," he said, leaning forward. "Not a Mafia princess. Not a gold digger who will end up on the front page of the tabloids throwing a martini in my face. They want to see a grounded, stable, respectable man. I need a woman with a spotless background, a woman who works hard, pays her taxes, and looks like a saint. I'm not a saint. You're a nurse who takes care of her dying mother," he said. "To them, you're Mother Teresa. Here is the deal. We announce our engagement. We make public appearances. We host dinners. You smile, you hold my hand, and you act like you love me. We get married on paper. 1 year. 365 days. After that, we divorce quietly, citing irreconcilable differences." "And why the hell would I do that?" she asked, her voice rising a fraction. "Why would I put a target on my back for your family politics?" Victor reached inside his jacket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. She didn't want to look. She looked anyway. It was a cashier's check, made out to her. $2 million, Victor said quietly. Tax-free, placed in an offshore trust in your name. Plus, I cover all your mother's medical expenses at any facility in the world for the rest of her life. Lana stared at the zeros. 2 million. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was sleep. It was never having to choose between groceries and heating gas again. It was a house with a garden for her mother. "And if I say no," she whispered, her throat tight, "then I finish my coffee, walk out that door, and you go back to counting pennies," he said. No threats, no intimidation, just cold, hard reality. He knew exactly what he was offering. She looked up from the check, meeting his eyes. "Rules. Strictly business," Victor agreed. "We share a residence, but different bedrooms. No physical intimacy beyond what is required for the public eye. You will have a security detail at all times. You do not ask about my business. You do not interfere in my business. And I can leave after a year?" "On the dot." She picked up her cold French fry, snapped it in half, and dropped it on the plate. Her hands were shaking, just a little. She hid them under the table. "Draft the contract," she said. "And I want half the money up front." Victor's mouth curved into that same imperceptible smirk he'd worn in the clinic. "I'll have my lawyers send it over tonight. Amore mio." 3 weeks later, Lana was standing in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the penthouse suite of the Rossi Casino, wearing a dress that cost more than her college tuition. It was a deep emerald green, silk clinging to her ribs and flaring out at the hips. The fabric felt like water against her skin. A diamond necklace heavy enough to choke a horse rested against her collarbone. She didn't look like Lana Hayes, the exhausted clinic nurse. She looked like a stranger. A very expensive, very beautiful stranger. The door opened behind her. Victor stepped into the room. He was wearing a black tuxedo. He looked lethal, the kind of handsome that didn't invite you in, but dared you to look away. His eyes dragged over her, slow and analytical, like he was appraising a painting at an auction. "The dress fits," he said, his voice flat. "It's tight," she replied, adjusting the neckline. "I can barely breathe." "You don't need to breathe. You just need to smile." He stepped closer, stopping just inches behind her. Their reflections stared back at them in the mirror. They looked like the top of a wedding cake, if the cake was baked with cyanide. Tonight is the commission dinner. 5 men. They are old, they are paranoid, and they are looking for a reason to reject me. My uncle, Carlo, is the loudest among them. He doesn't believe in sudden romance. He will test you. "I know my backstory," she said, reciting the lie they had rehearsed. "We met when you anonymously donated to the children's ward. We bonded over coffee. It was a whirlwind." "Words won't be enough," Victor said softly. He reached out, his knuckles brushing the bare skin of her shoulder. A shiver spiked down her spine, involuntary and sharp. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to his cold demeanor. Carlo reads people. If he senses hesitation, if he senses a transaction, the deal falls apart. And if I lose the commission, my enemies will see it as weakness. Weakness means blood. Understand? "I understand," she said, stepping away from his touch. "Let's just get it over with." The private dining room smelled of expensive cigars, roasted garlic, and old money. The 5 men sitting around the mahogany table stopped talking when they entered. Their eyes were like black glass, cold, assessing. Victor placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her to a chair. The warmth of his palm bled through the thin silk of her dress. He played the part perfectly, the attentive, smitten fiancé. He pulled out her chair, leaned in to whisper a fake joke in her ear, and kissed her cheek. Dinner was an interrogation disguised as a meal. Uncle Carlo sat at the head of the table. He was a heavy-set man with a thick silver beard and eyes that missed nothing. He ate his veal slowly, watching Lana over the rim of his wine glass. "Lana," Carlo said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "A nurse. Very noble work, cleaning up messes. I imagine my nephew makes quite a few messes." "Victor is surprisingly tidy, Mr. Rossi," she said, keeping her voice light, offering a practiced smile. "Though I'm sure he was a handful in his youth." The men chuckled, but it was a dry, humorless sound. "He tells us it was love at first sight," Carlo pressed, leaning his elbows on the table. "A whirlwind. You must forgive an old man's skepticism. My nephew has never been one for romance. He is a man of ledgers, contracts, bottom lines. What did he say to convince you to put a ring on your finger so quickly?" The air in the room grew heavy. Victor's hand, resting on the table next to hers, went perfectly still. She could feel the tension radiating off him. This was the test. She looked at Carlo, forcing the panic down. She thought about the $2 million. She thought about her mother's safe, warm room. She reached out and placed her hand over Victor's. "He didn't have to say anything, Mr. Rossi," she said softly, looking at Victor. She channeled every ounce of acting ability she had. She softened her eyes. She let a small, fond smile touch her lips. "Victor in public is very different from Victor in private. He pretends to be cold, but when it's just us, he's the only person who makes me feel safe. When you find that, you don't wait." Carlo stared at her for a long, suffocating moment. Then a slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "Beautiful words," Carlo said, raising his glass. "But words are cheap, my dear. I see how you sit. Stiff. Careful. A woman in love leans into her man. A woman in love can't keep her hands off him." Carlo gestured with his wine glass. Show me this great love." The room went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. Victor stiffened beside her, his jaw locked. "Carlo, you're drunk," Victor said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "Do not disrespect my fiancée. I am merely asking for a toast," Carlo boomed, slamming his hand on the table. "A kiss for the happy couple, unless, of course, the bride is shy or repulsed." It was a trap. If Victor refused, it confirmed Carlo's suspicion. If they fumbled, they would smell the lie. Before Victor could speak, before the violence she saw brewing in his grey eyes could spill over into the room, Lana turned to him. She grabbed the lapels of his tuxedo jacket. Victor's eyes widened a fraction of an inch, the only sign of surprise he allowed. She didn't close her eyes. She wanted him to see her. She wanted him to know this was part of the job. She pulled him down, tilting her head, and pressed her mouth to his. It was supposed to be a stage kiss, closed lips, a firm press, a believable fake. But the moment her lips touched his, the script caught fire. Victor didn't just accept the kiss, he took control of it. His large hand came up, wrapping around the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair to hold her in place. The kiss shifted from a performance to an ambush. His mouth was demanding, hot and tasting of expensive red wine and danger. Her breath hitched, a soft gasp escaping her, and he used the opening. The kiss deepened, sweeping away the sterile walls of their contract, shattering the cold, businesslike detachment they had built. Her heart slammed against her ribs, not from fear, from a sudden, terrifying jolt of electricity that wired straight down to her toes. Her hands, which had been holding his lapels strictly for leverage, instinctively slid up his chest, feeling the heavy, rapid thumping of his heart beneath the fine fabric. He wasn't calm. He was burning up. His thumb stroked the sensitive skin just beneath her ear, a touch so tender it contrasted violently with the possessive crush of his mouth. For 3 seconds, the room, the commission, and Uncle Carlo ceased to exist. There was only the taste of him, the heat radiating off his body, and the dizzying realization that she didn't want him to stop. When he finally pulled away, he didn't go far. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing visibly shallow. His concrete grey eyes were blown wide, the pupils dilated, staring into hers with a look she couldn't decipher. It wasn't cold. It wasn't calculating. It was entirely unguarded. They stayed like that for a heartbeat too long. A slow clap broke the silence. Carlo. "Well," the old man chuckled, raising his glass higher. "I stand corrected. To the happy couple." Lana turned back to the table, her lips tingling, her face flushed with genuine heat. She reached for her water glass, her hand trembling so badly she almost tipped it over. She looked at Victor. He was already staring at her, wiping a smudge of her red lipstick from the corner of his mouth with his thumb. The contract said no physical intimacy beyond what was required. But as she sat there, trying to steady her breathing, she realized the terrifying truth. The kiss was required, but the way it made her feel wasn't in the paperwork. The fake fiancé act had just crossed a line, and neither of them knew how to walk it back. Cardboard boxes always smell like failure. Lana was packing her life into 4 of them. 5 years in a cramped, drafty apartment above a dry cleaner, reduced to a stack of folded scrubs, a coffee maker with a cracked carafe, and a framed photograph of her mother before her mind began to dissolve. It was 8 a.m. on a Thursday, 12 hours since the kiss. Her lips still felt bruised. Every time she stopped moving, every time the silence of her apartment crept in, her brain replayed the heat of his mouth, the weight of his hand on her neck. She scrubbed her face with cold water, staring at the dark circles under her eyes in the bathroom mirror. "It's $2 million, she told her reflection. "It was a performance. Do your job, A black SUV idled on the street below. Her escort. Moving day wasn't a suggestion. It was a clause in page 4 of the contract. The Rossi estate was located on the North Shore, a sprawling limestone fortress hidden behind high wrought-iron gates and ancient oak trees. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a consulate. Cameras tracked their arrival. Men in dark suits and earpieces patrolled the perimeter. A housekeeper named Mrs. Gable, a stoic woman who looked like she could snap a man's neck while folding laundry, showed Lana to her room. It wasn't a room. It was a wing. The bed was larger than her entire previous kitchen. The sheets were high thread count silk, the furniture heavy mahogany. It was beautiful, and it was entirely suffocating. "Mr. Rossi is in his study," Mrs. Gable informed her, her tone perfectly neutral. "He requests your presence when you are settled." She didn't unpack. She left the boxes on the floor, smoothed down her cheap jeans and grey sweater, and walked down the cavernous hallway to find him. The study smelled of leather, old paper, and the faint, lingering metallic tang of gun oil. Victor was sitting behind a massive desk. He was out of the tuxedo, wearing a charcoal dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He was reviewing a stack of documents, his face a mask of absolute concentration. He didn't look up when she walked in. "The room is acceptable?" "It's fine," she said, standing in front of his desk. She wasn't going to sit. Sitting felt like submitting. "Good. Mrs. Gable will provide you with a credit card linked to a joint account. You need a new wardrobe. The clothes you brought won't pass muster for the circles we need to move in." He flipped a page. He still wasn't looking at her. "Are we going to talk about last night?" she asked. The pen in his hand stopped moving. The silence in the room stretched, pulling tight like a piano wire. Victor slowly set the pen down. He raised his head. The grey eyes were back to their concrete baseline. Cold. Impenetrable. "There is nothing to discuss," he said flatly. "You saw an opportunity to convince Carlo. You took it. I followed your lead. It was a tactical success. The commission voted this morning. The transition is approved." "Right. Tactical," she repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "So that grip on my neck, the way you—" She stopped. She wasn't going to beg for validation from a mobster. Victor leaned back in his chair. "Lana, let us not confuse a physical reaction with an emotional one. We are two healthy adults. Adrenaline was high. The stakes were high. It was a biologically predictable response." He was reducing it to chemistry, to a lab experiment. "Biologically predictable," she echoed, nodding slowly. "Got it. So, just to clarify the terms of my employment, are spontaneous, biologically predictable make-out sessions part of my daily duties, or just for special occasions?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. The ice cracked, just a fraction. He stood up, planting his hands on the desk, leaning toward her. His size was a weapon, and he knew how to use it. "Do not push me, Lana." His voice dropped to that dangerous, gravelly timbre. "You want the truth? The truth is, it was a mistake. It blurred a line that I require to be razor-sharp. You are an employee. I am your employer. You get your money, you get your mother's care, and in 364 days, you walk out of those gates and forget I exist. That is the reality. Do not romanticize this." She stared right back at him. She refused to shrink. "Don't flatter yourself, Victor," she said, her voice dead calm. "I work in urgent care. I deal with blood, vomit, and junkies looking for a fix. You're just another messy patient to me. Pay my mother's bills and I'll play whatever part you want. but don't ever think I'm confused about what you are." She turned on her heel and walked out of the study. Her spine was rigid, her chin high, but as she closed the heavy oak doors behind her, her hands were shaking. He was right. It was a contract. She just needed to remember that her heart wasn't part of the collateral. The hardest part about selling your life is figuring out what to do with your free time. For the first 2 weeks, Lana was a ghost haunting a limestone castle. Victor was a phantom. They performed their duties with mechanical precision. A staged paparazzi photo outside a high-end restaurant. A brief, smiling appearance at a city councilman's fundraiser. They held hands. He kissed her cheek. They smiled for the cameras, and the moment the car doors closed, they sat in freezing silence, staring out opposite windows. The media ate it up. The reformed rogue, the angel of mercy, tames the Rossière. It made her sick to read, but it worked. At night, the silence of the estate was deafening. She was used to the hum of the hospital, the screech of sirens, the constant, chaotic rhythm of survival. Here, it was just the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. On night 15, at 3 a.m., her insomnia won. She abandoned her silk sheets, pulled a worn-out, oversized hoodie over her pajama shorts, and padded barefoot down the marble stairs. She was aiming for the kitchen. She needed warm milk, or maybe a shot of tequila, whichever she found first. The kitchen was a chef's dream of stainless steel and black granite. It was dark, save for the blue glow of the digital oven clock, and a single puddle of warm, amber light pooling over the center island. Victor was sitting on a bar stool. He wore grey sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt. No suit, no armor. His head was resting in one hand, his fingers buried in his dark hair. A tumbler of amber liquid sat untouched in front of him, next to an open, battered leather ledger. He didn't reach for a gun when she walked in. He didn't even flinch. He just lifted his head, his eyes heavy with a fatigue she recognized instantly. It was the bone-deep exhaustion of someone carrying a weight they couldn't put down. "You shouldn't be wandering the house at night," he said, his voice raspy. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, walking past him to the industrial refrigerator. She opened it, the cold air washing over her bare legs. "You look terrible." "Thank you." She grabbed a carton of milk, poured it into a mug, and stuck it in the microwave. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms, watching him. Without the tailored suits and the gel in his hair, he looked younger. And infinitely more dangerous, because he looked human. She noticed a jagged, pale scar running up his right forearm, disappearing under the sleeve of his t-shirt. It wasn't a bullet wound. It looked like a blade. "Nightmares?" she asked, nodding toward his glass. Victor looked at the ledger, then at the scotch. Ledgers, numbers, names. The things my father left behind. "I thought the commission approved the transition." "They did." He rubbed his eyes. "That just means they won't actively try to kill me. It doesn't mean they'll make it easy. My father built this empire on loyalty, but loyalty died with him. Now it's just fear, and fear requires constant maintenance." It was the most he had spoken to her without an audience since the diner. The microwave beeped. She pulled out her mug. She walked over to the island and sat on the stool opposite him. "Why did you take it?" she asked, blowing on the hot milk. "If it's just a burden, you have money. You could have walked away." Victor let out a short, humorless laugh. "You don't walk away from this life, Lana. You bleed out of it. If I stepped down, my uncle would have taken over. Carlo is a butcher. He would have started a war with the North Side within a week. The streets would be flooded with collateral damage." He looked at her, really looked at her. and she saw the barest hint of vulnerability in those concrete eyes. "I am a violent man," Victor stated, stating a fact, not offering an apology. "I know what I am, but I am controlled. I keep the violence contained to the people who deserve it. If I let go of the reins, the monster gets out of the cage." She took a sip of her milk. The silence between them wasn't freezing anymore. It was just quiet. "How is your mother?" he asked suddenly. She blinked, thrown by the pivot. "She's comfortable. The new facility in Switzerland is incredible. The nurses are kind. She doesn't know who I am anymore, but she's not afraid." Her throat tightened. She swallowed hard, hating the sting of tears behind her eyes. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury. Victor reached across the granite island. He didn't touch her hand. He just pushed his tumbler of scotch toward her. "Milk doesn't work for ghosts," he said softly. She looked at the glass, then at him. She pushed the mug aside, took the heavy crystal tumbler, and drank. The scotch burned a fiery trail down her throat, settling warm in her empty stomach. They sat there for another hour. They didn't talk anymore. They just shared the quiet, two insomniacs guarding their own respective monsters in the dark. When she finally went back to her room, the house didn't feel quite so cold, and that terrified her more than anything. Week 6. The Autumn Gala for the City Orphanage. It was the social event of the season, a place where the city's elite gathered to out-donate each other while drinking champagne that cost more than a Honda. It was also neutral ground. The unspoken rule of the underworld was that you didn't shed blood at charity events where the mayor was present. Lana wore a backless crimson gown that clung to her body like a second skin. Victor wore a midnight blue tuxedo. They were the undisputed center of attention. For the first 2 hours it was easy. They smiled, they nodded, they signed a massive, oversized novelty check. Victor's hand never left the small of her back. It was a possessive gesture, meant for the cameras, but after their night in the kitchen, his touch felt different. It didn't feel like a brand. It felt like an anchor. "You're doing well," Victor murmured, his lips brushing her ear as they pretended to admire a modern art sculpture that looked like twisted bicycle parts. 30 more minutes and we can leave." "Good. My heels are planning a mutiny," she whispered back. He actually smiled, a real, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. It altered his entire face, making her breath hitch in her chest. Before she could process the reaction, the air in the room seemed to curdle. Victor's smile vanished. His spine went rigid, and his hand on her back tightened, pulling her flush against his side. She followed his gaze. A man was walking towards them. He was impeccably dressed, perhaps 10 years older than Victor, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that looked like a razor blade. "Leo Moretti," Victor said under his breath, the name sounding like a curse. The Moretti family controlled the narcotics trade on the east side. They were the rivals Victor had mentioned, the ones Carlo would have gone to war with. "Victor, my boy!" Moretti boomed, opening his arms wide. He ignored the tension radiating from Victor and stepped into their personal space. "I was beginning to think you'd become a monk." "And this?" Moretti's eyes slid to Lana. They were oily, scanning her up and down with blatant, uncomfortable hunger. "Must be the famous Lana." "Moretti," Victor said, his voice dropping to that lethal octave. He didn't offer his hand. "Such a beautiful girl," Moretti continued, unbothered by the slight. He stepped closer to her. "A nurse, they tell me. How fascinating. Tell me, Lana, does my young friend here treat you well? He has a reputation for breaking his toys." "Victor treats me perfectly, Mr. Moretti," she said, keeping her chin up, refusing to break eye contact. She recognized the type. Bullies were the same in the ER waiting room as they were in 5-star ballrooms. They fed on fear. "Is that so?" Moretti reached out. He didn't go for a handshake. He reached for her face, his fingers aiming to trace her jawline. He never made contact. Victor moved faster than she could track. 1 second, he was standing beside her. The next, he had Moretti by the wrist. The movement wasn't violent, but the grip was. The knuckles of Victor's hand went white. The jovial mask on Moretti's face shattered, replaced by a grimace of sharp, sudden pain. The ambient noise of the gala faded. The people nearest to them stopped talking, stepping back. Security guards in the corners of the room shifted, hands resting near their suit jackets. "Do not touch her," Victor said. The words weren't loud. They were a whisper, cold and deadly as a scalpel. "A bit overprotective, aren't we, Victor?" Moretti hissed, trying to pull his hand back. He couldn't. Victor held him like a vice. "It was just a compliment. Keep your compliments to yourself. Keep your hands in your pockets. And keep your eyes off my fiancée," Victor said. He stepped forward, forcing Moretti to take a step back. "If you ever approach her again, Leo, neutrality pact or not, I will cut your hands off and mail them to your wife. Do we understand each other?" Moretti stared at him, shock mingling with fury. He looked at Victor's eyes and saw the absolute truth in the threat. Victor released his wrist, shoving Moretti's arm back toward him in disgust. Moretti rubbed his wrist, his face flushed. "You're getting soft, Rossi. The old man would be ashamed. A woman is a liability. You just showed the whole room where your throat is." Moretti turned and stalked away into the crowd. Lana's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The adrenaline was a toxic rush in her veins. Victor didn't look at the crowd. He turned to her. His chest was heaving slightly, the pristine mask of the mob boss completely fractured. His eyes were wide, scanning her face, checking for panic. "Are you all right?" he demanded, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't place. She looked at him. She looked at the man who had just risked a gang war over a fake fiancée. Moretti was right. Victor had just broadcasted a weakness, but looking at the fierce, unyielding protectiveness in his eyes, she realized the terrifying flaw in their perfect contract. It wasn't a performance anymore. "I'm fine," she breathed, her voice trembling. Victor didn't say another word. He grabbed her hand, lacing his fingers tightly through hers, and pulled her toward the exit. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the optics. He just needed to get her out. As they walked out into the freezing October night, the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just a prop in his game anymore. And worse, much worse, he wasn't just a patient in hers. The ride back to the estate was a masterclass in suffocation. The privacy partition in the SUV was rolled up, leaving Victor and Lana in the heavy, leather-scented dark. The streetlights bled through the tinted windows, flashing rhythmically across his face. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might crack. He had just painted a bullseye on her back to the worst kind of men, and they both knew it. When the car finally idled to a stop in front of the mansion, Victor didn't wait for the driver. He shoved his door open, stepped into the freezing October wind, and walked inside. She scrambled out after him, hiking up the heavy skirt of her crimson dress. She caught up to him in the study. He had already discarded his suit jacket on a leather chair and was pouring a scotch. His hand, the same hand that had nearly crushed Moretti's wrist, was trembling. "You promised me safe," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the quiet room like a siren. Victor stopped pouring. He didn't turn around. "The contract," she continued, closing the distance between them. Page 2, a security detail. A quiet, uneventful year. You just started a war with the East Side over a cheap insult. You gave them the one thing they didn't have before tonight. Leverage. He set the decanter down. The clink of crystal against wood was the only warning she got before he spun around. The distance between them vanished. He backed her up against the edge of the heavy mahogany desk, his hands coming down on either side of her hips, trapping her. He smelled of rain, expensive cologne, and adrenaline. "You think I don't know that?" he snarled, his voice a raw, jagged whisper. His grey eyes were entirely unmoored, frantic in a way she had never seen. "You think I haven't spent the last 40 minutes calculating exactly how many men I need to position around this house, around your mother's clinic in Switzerland? Then why did you do it?" She pushed back, her hands planting on his chest. She felt his heart hammering against her palms. "You're the man of ledgers. You calculate everything. What was the tactical advantage of threatening Leo Moretti?" "There wasn't one!" Victor shouted. The sheer volume of it shocked them both into silence. He dropped his head, his breathing harsh and ragged. He stayed there for a long moment, staring at the floor, before slowly lifting his gaze to meet hers. The anger was gone. What was left behind was terrifyingly fragile. "There was no tactic, Lana," he said, his voice dropping to a broken gravel. "He was touching you. He was looking at you like you were something he could buy and break. I saw his hand reaching for your face, and the only thought in my head was how long it would take me to snap his neck." He lifted a hand, hesitating for a fraction of a second, before resting his palm against her cheek. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone. It was the softest touch from the most violent man she had ever known. "You are my blind spot," he whispered. "You were supposed to be a transaction, a shield to keep the commission off my back. But every time I look at you, I forget the rules. I forget the contract." She should have pushed him away. She should have reminded him of the $2 million and the strict boundaries of their arrangement. She was a cynical, exhausted nurse who knew better than to bet her life on a mob boss with a target on his back. But as his thumb traced her lower lip, the cynicism evaporated. "Victor," she breathed. "Tell me to step back," he murmured, leaning in until she could feel the heat of his breath. "Tell me this is just a job, Lana. Tell me to walk away, and I swear to God, I will never cross the line again." She looked at his bruised knuckles. She looked at the dark, exhausted circles under his eyes. He was offering her an exit. She grabbed his tie and pulled him down. The kiss at the dinner table had been a performance that accidentally caught fire. This was an inferno. There was no audience, no Uncle Carlo to impress. Just them. His mouth crushed against hers, desperate and hungry. His hand slid to her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the edge of the desk. Her legs wrapped around his hips, pulling him flush against her. He tasted like scotch and desperation. Her fingers tangled in his dark hair, ruining the perfect, untouchable image he presented to the world. He kissed her like a drowning man stealing his last breath. It was messy, breathless, and entirely real. When he finally broke the kiss, his forehead rested against hers, both of them gasping for air in the quiet study. "This wins the contract," she whispered against his lips. "I'll burn it," he answered, before pulling her back into the dark. The illusion of safety shattered exactly 12 days later. She was in the kitchen, nursing a black coffee, when the front gates of the estate groaned open. She looked out the bay window. A convoy of 5 black town cars snaked up the driveway. Victor was in his study. By the time Lana reached the foyer, Mrs. Gable was already opening the front doors. Uncle Carlo walked in. He wasn't alone. Leo Moretti flanked his right side, flanked by half a dozen men whose suits bulged terribly at the shoulders. Her blood ran cold. The commission rules were strict. No rival bosses on family property without a formal invitation. This wasn't a visit. This was a coup. "Where is my nephew?" Carlo demanded, not looking at Mrs. Gable. His eyes found Lana standing on the stairs. He offered a cold, satisfied smile. "Ah, the nurse. Still playing house, I see." The doors to the study swung open. Victor stepped out. He was dressed in a simple black button-down and trousers, but his posture was coiled steel. "Uncle," Victor said, his voice dangerously calm. "Leo, you are trespassing." "We are intervening," Carlo corrected, stepping into the center of the foyer. The armed men fanned out behind him. "The commission convened an emergency meeting this morning, Victor. Without you. Your display at the gala was a disgrace. You threatened an ally over a piece of skirt. You've shown the entire city that you are ruled by your temper, not your head." "And the commission decided to send you to correct me?" Victor asked, walking slowly toward the base of the stairs, positioning himself between Lana and the intruders. "They voted, Victor," Moretti chimed in, his oily smile firmly in place. "A unanimous decision. You are unfit to lead the Rossi family. Carlo is stepping in as acting head. You are to surrender the estate, the accounts, and the territory. If you do it quietly, we let you walk away. You can even take the nurse with you." It was the ultimate trap. They had used Victor's protection of her as the exact leverage needed to strip him of his power. "You brought gunmen into my home," Victor noted, looking at the thugs. "A necessary precaution," Carlo said. "Hand over the ledgers, Victor. It's over." Victor didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't shout. Instead, a slow, dark smirk spread across his face. It was the same look he gave Lana the night he walked into her clinic, bleeding from a gunshot wound. "You wanted a man of ledgers, Uncle," Victor said softly. "A man who focuses on the bottom line. It's funny, when I took over Father's accounts, I found a lot of discrepancies. Millions of dollars bleeding out of the dock unions over the last 5 years. Carlo's arrogant smile faltered. "Just a fraction. Your father was sloppy in his old age." "My father was exact," Victor countered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black flash drive. He held it up by a silver chain. "I spent the last 3 months tracking the ghost accounts. They didn't lead to my father's mistakes. They led to a shell company in the Caymans, a company registered to your wife's maiden name, Carlo." The foyer went dead silent. The thugs behind Carlo exchanged nervous glances. Stealing from the family wasn't just a fireable offense in the syndicate. It was a death sentence. "Lies," Carlo spat, though a sheen of sweat suddenly appeared on his forehead. "You're trying to save your own skin." Victor ignored him, turning his gaze to Moretti. "And Leo, did you really think Carlo was going to share the throne with you? I pulled the shipping manifests from the East Side docks. Carlo has been skimming your fentanyl shipments and selling them back to your own street-level dealers at a premium." "Shut your mouth!" Carlo roared, taking a step forward. "It's all on this drive," Victor said, his voice cutting through the space like a whip. "Which I forwarded to the remaining 3 commission members 10 minutes ago, along with the wiretap recordings of you, Carlo, promising Moretti my territory in exchange for his votes today." The atmosphere in the room completely inverted. Carlo wasn't the predator cornering his prey anymore. He was a rat in a trap. Systemic, undeniable accountability. Victor hadn't just prepared for a gunfight. He had completely bankrupted their credibility. He used the very rules they tried to weaponize against him. Moretti turned slowly to look at Carlo. "You've been taxing my shipments?" "He's lying to divide us," Carlo shouted, his face turning purple. He looked back at his gunmen. "Take him! Take them both!" Nobody moved. Victor checked his heavy gold watch. "Carlo, the men standing behind you don't work for you anymore. I doubled their salaries at 8 a.m. this morning. The commission has reviewed the files. They just issued their ruling." Victor looked up. The grey eyes were absolute, terrifying zero. "You are stripped of your assets, Uncle. You are excommunicated from the family. You have 1 hour to pack a bag and get on a plane to somewhere very cold and very far away. If you ever set foot in this city again, I won't need a vote to bury you." Carlo's mouth opened and closed. He looked at the gunmen, who stared back with blank, indifferent faces. He had been completely, thoroughly outplayed. The arrogance that had fueled him for decades crumbled in a matter of seconds. He turned, pushing past his own men, and walked out the door, a broken, exiled old man facing the absolute ruin of his own karma. Moretti cleared his throat, trying to salvage his pride. Well, it seems this was an internal family matter after all. "I'll be taking my leave, Rossi." "Leo," Victor called out. Moretti stopped. "The next time you look at my fiancée, I will make sure the IRS receives the second flash drive. Get out." Moretti didn't say a word. He practically sprinted to the cars. When the front doors finally clicked shut, the silence in the foyer was deafening. Victor stood at the bottom of the stairs, the absolute master of his empire. He looked up at Lana. The coldness vanished, replaced by a deep, weary relief. "It's done," he said softly. She walked down the stairs, her heart pounding a steady, triumphant rhythm. He didn't just survive. He cleaned the house. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he buried his face in her shoulder, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for a year. 365 days. The cardboard boxes were back, 4 of them, sitting exactly in the center of the massive Persian rug in her bedroom. They smelled the same as they had a year ago, like dust, cheap corrugated paper, and impending reality. Lana stood in the center of the room, holding a stack of faded scrubs. The year was up. Today was October 14th. The contract had officially expired at midnight. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an automated email alert from the offshore bank. The trust had fully vested. $2 million sat neatly under her name. A second email sat below it, a quarterly update from the clinic in Switzerland. Her mother was thriving. She had spent the afternoon painting in the conservatory. The facility was paid up for the next 20 years. She had everything she had originally bargained for. She had won. So why did her chest feel like it was caving in? She dropped the scrubs into the nearest box and reached for the packing tape. The sharp, tearing sound of the adhesive ripping off the roll echoed in the quiet room. It sounded violent. The past 6 months had been a strange, beautiful paradox. Following the exile of Uncle Carlo, the syndicate went dead quiet. Victor systematically restructured his empire. He severed the rotting limbs of the organization, burying the violent elements so deeply beneath layers of legitimate shipping and real estate companies that they rarely saw daylight. He didn't come home smelling of copper and cordite anymore. He came home smelling of espresso and printer ink, and behind closed doors the performance had slowly stopped. They didn't talk about it. They just lived it. She stopped retreating to her wing of the estate after dinner. They shared takeout over the kitchen island at 2 a.m. She read cheap paperback thrillers on the leather sofa in his study while he reviewed contracts. She had memorized the exact, steady rhythm of his breathing and the rough texture of the scar on his forearm. She knew he took his coffee black. She knew he hated the smell of lavender. She knew the exact angle his jaw set when he was stressed, But they never spoke about October 14th. They both ignored the calendar, playing a dangerous game of chicken with the expiration date. She folded her cheap jeans, the ones she had arrived in, and placed them on top of the scrubs. She was reaching for the framed photograph of her mother when a shadow fell across the open doorway. Victor stood there. He wasn't wearing his armor. He wore a heavy grey knit sweater and dark denim. His hair was slightly mussed, like he had been running his hands through it. He looked at the 4 cardboard boxes. The muscle in his jaw feathered, hard and sharp. "Mrs. Gable informed me you requested a car for the airport at noon," he said. His voice was dangerously even, scraped hollow of any emotion. "I'm going to visit my mother," she replied. She didn't look at him. If she looked at him, her hands would start shaking, and she needed to pack. "I haven't seen her in a year. The clinic says she's having a good week." "And after Switzerland?" he asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. She placed the photo frame carefully into the box. "I don't know. The contract says I leave. My job is done. Carlo is gone. The commission is in line. You're anchored." Victor stepped into the room. He didn't look like a mob boss holding the reins of the city. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a very high cliff. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a folded piece of heavy, cream-colored parchment paper. She recognized the blue legal seals instantly. It was the original physical copy of the contract, the one they had both signed in blood ink in his study 12 months ago. "I drafted this to save my empire," Victor said quietly. He held the thick paper between his large hands, his thumb tracing the sharp crease. "I told myself you were just a tool, a biological necessity to pacify old men. I told you not to romanticize it. I explicitly ordered you to keep it business." He stopped at the edge of the Persian rug. The physical distance between them was only 4 feet, but it felt like a minefield. He looked up at her. The concrete grey of his eyes was entirely unmoored, raw and completely undefended. "I was a fool, Lana," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, broken timbre. "I spent my entire adult life building walls, hoarding leverage, making absolutely sure no one could ever touch me. Because attachment in my world is a death sentence. And then you walked into my clinic, stitched up my ribs without blinking, and completely dismantled me." He took a step closer, crushing the invisible boundary between them. "The Empire means nothing if I have to walk these halls alone," he confessed, the words tearing out of him. "You asked me once what the tactical advantage was in defending you. There isn't one. Loving you is the biggest, most reckless liability I have ever taken on. And I do not care." He held up the contract. With a single, sharp, violent motion, he tore the heavy parchment in half. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the quiet room. He put the pieces together and tore them again. Quarters, eighths. He let the shredded remains fall from his hands, the pieces drifting down like dirty snow to settle over the cardboard boxes and the expensive rug. "The job is over," Victor whispered. He reached out, his large, calloused hands gently cupping her face. His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "The fake fiancé is dismissed. I am asking the woman who sees the monster and doesn't flinch. Stay. Please, Lana. Stay with me." She looked down at the shredded paper covering her cheap belongings. She looked at the man who had systematically torn down his entire, carefully constructed world just to make room for her in it. She didn't need to count pennies anymore. She didn't need to survive on 4 hours of sleep and stale diner coffee. But standing there, anchored by Victor Rossi's hands, she realized that surviving wasn't the same thing as living. Survival was just a heartbeat. Living was finding a reason to keep it beating. She reached up, wrapping her hands over his wrists. She felt the steady, hammering pulse beneath his skin. "You're going to have to make room in the closet," she whispered, her voice finally cracking as a single tear escaped down her cheek. "Because I'm not unpacking these boxes just to pack them again." Victor exhaled a harsh, shaky breath, a sound of profound, staggering relief. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like a vice. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, holding on as if she were the only solid thing left on earth. The lie had started with a stray bullet and a $10,000 bribe in a fluorescent-lit clinic. It ended with a destroyed contract and a truth stronger than any blood oath. They were two deeply flawed, exhausted people who had built a kingdom in the dark. And finally, they were ready to turn on the lights. Did the ultimate fake dating contract keep you on the edge of your seat? Lana and Victor's journey from a cold business deal to an undeniable, empire-shaking romance proves that sometimes the biggest risks yield the highest rewards. If you loved watching Victor tear down his walls and his enemies for the woman he loves, smash that like button. Share this video with your fellow romance addicts and hit subscribe to join our community for more intense, grounded, and deeply emotional audio stories. Let me know in the comments, what was your favorite moment of their hard-earned karma? See you in the next story.